The third Caliph, the third ruler of Islam amongst the four just or righteous Caliphs, the Khulafa Rashidun, is called Uthman. Uthman, again, a relative member of the greater family of the Prophet, rules from 644 to 656. Okay, so he actually controls the Islamic nation for 12 years, the longest period amongst the four righteous caliphs. And his main importance in the history of Islam is linked with the holy book of Islam, known as the Quran. Now, the Quran, which we mentioned in the past, is the holy book. It can be compared to the Jewish Torah, the Old Testament, and the five books of Moses, and the entire Bible. It can be compared in Christianity with the New Testament. It's a 114 chapters of the prophecies given to the Prophet Muhammad by Allah since the first revelation in the year 610 and until his death. The problem was that Muhammad himself did not write anything. According to Islamic tradition, Muhammad was illiterate. He did not know how to read or write. Obviously, in those past days, reading and writing were part of a very restricted and professional knowledge owned by a minority, the minority of people who had to know that to fulfill the jobs, such as people who write history, people who work at the service of a ruler and send his letters, prepare documents, and so on. So a leader of a new faith did not necessarily have to know how to read and write. It's the Islamic tradition, actually, that saying that he didn't know how to read and write. And the motivation behind this is probably comes from probably the fact that in the early days, the Prophet was accused by his opponents that he himself composed the Quran. So the claim that he is illiterate actually comes in order to establish the fact that in no way could he, Muhammad, the person, have written or composed the Quran, because he is illiterate. He is not a man of general culture, knowledge of ancient sources, religious Jewish traditions and religious Christian traditions that all are present in the Quran. That's probably the reason for the insistence amongst early Muslim sources that he was illiterate. Yet we do know that when he spoke to the people, what he said was basically put in writing by his listeners. This is a fact. We know that. I mentioned earlier, for instance, the story about Omar's conversion in the early days of Islam. And when his sister comes to Omar and says to her brother, read the prophecies, it means that there was something written already back then. People who listened did not just rehearsed what he said in their minds, in their hearts, but they simply copied it and wrote that on scrolls or whatever. So there were obviously written versions of the Quran, and the point is that there were versions of the Quran, because one may expect, obviously, that if one person speaks and there are many people listening, each writing, recording what the Prophet says, you'd obviously end up having different versions of the verses. You know, you don't. So one of the listeners was not paying attention when something was said. Another one misheard what was said. So obviously, you're bound to get different versions of anything. I have that experience at the university and in tour guide courses. when I speak to people, and then some of them come to me and ask me questions, and they ask from the reports what they've written of what I said. And sometimes it's very difficult to actually realize that what's written in the notebooks is something that I said. So I'm sure that was also the situation in the time of Muhammad. And therefore, obviously, when the Prophet was alive, there was no real problem. If you had different versions and you had a dispute about what exactly was said, you could always go to the Prophet and ask him himself, and he would tell you what's the right version. But what happens after the Prophet is dead in 632? There's no one to ask. So in the time of Uthman, he realized that he has to do what we call canonization of the Quran's of the Quran's prophecies, meaning to decide which version of each chapter is a trustworthy version and which are to be suppressed, eliminated. And indeed, that process of the canonization of the Quran started and ended in the 12-year period of the rule of Uthman. It's interesting to note, though, that when we compare that to Christianity and Judaism, it's relatively rapid. It's a revolutionized process, not an evolution. In Judaism, let's say if the earlier written sources go back to the First Temple period, according to some scholars, and the latest sources are from the Second Temple period, such as the Book of Daniel. It means that the canonization, the decision, what is the definite version of the Bible, the Jewish Bible, that process took hundreds of years. It is similar in the case of Christianity. Within a couple of hundreds of years, say by the end of the 4th century, the canon of the Old Testament was already agreed. So it's hundreds of years in both cases. Unlike the case of Islam, in which within less than 12 years the canonization of the Quran took place. Now, Uthman Uthman's initiative was obviously met with opposition. People disagreed with his decisions, with his decision what to include in the Quran and what not to include. And later we have traditions, for instance, amongst the Shiites, and I will not talk about the Shiites yet. We'll dedicate a lesson to the Shiites. They're so important. But the Shiites are a group in Islam who did not accept the canonization of Uthman. They claimed in their tradition that when Uthman canonized the Quran, he used his power to suppress and eliminate 300 versions, to add 300 versions that he invented that did not exist in the Quran, and to alter another 300 verses. So obviously that claim cannot be corroborated. It was said by Shiite sources who oppose the Sunni majority in Islam, and we'll discuss that later. So whether this is the case or not, I cannot tell, but it does show that there was some opposition to his attempt to create one unified version of the Quran. Uthman was later assassinated. By the way, his predecessor, Omar, was also assassinated. His successor, Ali, will also be assassinated. The only one who actually survived assassination was Abu Bakr, and that was probably due to the fact that he simply died too early because he was bitten by a snake. It means that the period of the four righteous caliphs, even though it is presented in Islamic historiography as the shining era of Islam, the glorious era of Islam, was actually quite turbulent, and political struggles prevailed. The next and last of the four caliphs was the fourth caliph, Ali, who ruled from 656 to 661. So not too long, but longer than Abu Bakr. Ali was the cousin of the Prophet. They actually grew up together, and he has known Muhammad from a very young age. And he was one of the first supporters and followers of the Prophet. Yet, even though Ali believed that he should have been the successor of Muhammad and not Abu Bakr, Omar, or Uthman, he was always pushed aside by stronger powers. And therefore, only after the killing of Uthman, after the assassination of the former caliph, was Ali able to take over and be recognized as the leader of the Muslims. Now, not all of Muslims at the time agreed that Ali should be the caliph. One of them was Aisha. So Aisha was the young wife of the Prophet Muhammad, whom he married at the age of 6, but now she's grown up. She's a woman, and she's seemingly quite powerful, even from the political point of view. Partially because she is the wife of the Prophet, partially perhaps because she has known the Prophet for so long that she became a channel, a pipe through which people could actually ask questions about how did the Prophet behave in this or that occasion, what he has done, so we can learn today what we should do, and so on. Aisha was a source of traditions about the Prophet. Hence, that established her position as an important figure in early Islam. And Aisha gathers an army, and she decides to battle against Ali, believing that she will be able to defeat him. Obviously, she was wrong, and she was defeated in this famous battle known as the Battle of the Camel, due to the fact that Aisha rode a camel during the battle. But Aisha was the least of Ali's problems. The main problem was a powerful leader and governor within the political establishment of the Muslim empire. And the name of that guy was Muawiyah. He was the governor of Syria. Remember, Syria, the land of Israel, Egypt, they're all under Islamic control at the moment, because it was all occupied in the 630s and the early 640s. Muawiyah is quite powerful, and Muawiyah is also far away. And Muawiyah has some ambitions. He thinks that he could use the opportunity of the assassination of the former Caliph Uthman to become the new fourth caliph. His aspirations are supported by the fact that he is a relative of the dead caliph. But obviously he needs a pretext. He needs some excuse to fulfill his ambitions, to motivate a war against the fourth caliph, Ali. And that pretext is actually given to him, handed over to him by the widow of the former caliph Uthman. She who opposes Ali too. So we have two women opposing Ali. He wasn't that successful with women, apparently. So the widow of the Caliph Uthman approaches Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, and complains. She complains that Ali seems not to be too keen to revenge the death of her husband, the dead husband Uthman. And therefore, she encourages Muawiyah to revenge the blood of the former caliph, and in doing so, basically go against the ruling caliph Ali. And that's exactly what Muawiyah needed, legitimacy to go against the ruling caliph. And indeed, within a very short time, a huge Muslim army marches from Syria to the east to attack the army of Ali. Well, Ali eventually manages to survive the attack, but the cost was too heavy. His leadership was challenged not just by Muawiyah, not just by Aisha, not just by the widow of the former caliph, but also by a group of Muslims who decided that the way he handled the battle against the Umayyads was totally misled. And I'll tell you about it later when we discuss the Shiites, because this battle is extremely important and it deserves a discussion of itself. But the result of that criticism against Ali was that a group of Muslims, a large group of Muslims, decided to leave the mainstream Islam and create a party known as the Khawarij. The Khawarij, those who went apart, who left the mainstream group of Islam. So that was the first division within Islam taking place in the time of Ali. Now, Ali, of course, could not allow that to happen. He had to show the Khawarij that they're not allowed to do whatever they want. And in doing so, basically, he ended up slaughtering them, butchering them by the thousands. One of the survivors of the slaughter of the Khawarij later revenged and assassinated Ali. So Ali died himself. So this chain of events that took place within a short period of time of about 5 years ended up by the death of the ruling fourth righteous caliph, and as a result, Muawiyah, the rebel, the governor of Syria, receives the oath of allegiance from the Muslims, and he becomes the new caliph. Now, he is also the founder of the first dynasty in Islam, the Umayyad dynasty, so we do not see him as the continuation of the Khulafa al-Rashidun. He begins a new period in the history of Islam. But, mind you, as I mentioned earlier, within the story of Ali also hides the birth of an extremely powerful party within Islam, and this is the Shiite party, which is still powerful and influential within the Muslim world today. So what I'd like to do in our next lecture is to dedicate some time to discuss the historical birth of the Shiite group, and to ask, what are its beliefs? What do Shiites believe? Are they the same as other Muslims, or are there other characteristics to their belief? So all that will be discussed in the next lecture.